They called me selfish. After I refused to split the house I was nearly kicked out of as a child. I'm Ethan. For years, my stepfamily treated me like furniture. There, but never seen. But Grandma? She saw everything. And before she died, she made sure I'd never be pushed aside again. When they found out she left me the entire estate, they tried to take it back. But the part that hurt the most wasn't the lawsuit. It was realizing they only came back when there was something to gain. Have you ever been treated like a guest in your own family? I'd really love to hear your story below. I was 5 the day my dad bent down and fixed the little clip-on tie at my collar. His hands smelled like cologne and aftershave, and his smile was tight like he'd practiced it in the mirror. "You're getting a mom today," he told me, smoothing down my cowlick. "And some brothers and sisters, too." For a moment I believed him. Really believed. I stood taller, brushed the crumbs from my little navy vest, and smiled back. The air outside the church was crisp with early autumn. Orange leaves spun around our feet like confetti, and the porch of the old building had been decorated with faux pumpkins and a banner that read, "New Beginnings." Inside, everything smelled like warm bread and roses. My dad's new wife, Tamara, was dressed in a pale peach dress, not white. She said she'd already worn white once before and didn't believe in repeating symbols. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. The kind of voice you use with store clerks or mailmen. She bent down and hugged me gently. "You must be Ethan," she said, as if we hadn't already met once last month. "You're such a big boy." Her 4 kids stood a few steps behind her: Jake, Melissa, Brian, and Zoe. They looked like a catalog family, matching beige sweaters, neatly brushed hair. Jake was the oldest, maybe 10 or 11. He didn't say hi. None of them did. I offered them a drawing I'd made the night before, a picture of our new family. I'd used all my best crayons, the green for Dad's tie, the yellow for Tamara's hair, red for the leaves. I drew myself holding hands with the other kids in front of a house with a blue door. Melissa took the drawing, glanced at it, and passed it to Brian, who crumpled it by folding it the wrong way. Zoe whispered something and giggled. I stood there holding my breath, not knowing if I should laugh or cry. The ceremony was short. A few family friends sat in pews lined with golden ribbons, but most of the benches were empty. Dad looked happy, or at least committed to looking happy. Tamara glowed, smiling wide for the Polaroid photos someone snapped. The rest of us kids stood off to the side like furniture waiting to be moved. After the vows, we were led to a guest room to change into casual clothes before the cake. Tamara insisted we all use the same space to start bonding. But bonding wasn't what happened. Jake rolled his eyes, Melissa refused to talk to me, and Brian shoved me when I tried to sit on the end of the bench. "Move," he said. "This is for family." I hit the floor with a dull thud, my elbow scraping the corner of a chair. The sting was sharp, but not as sharp as the silence that followed. No one gasped. No one helped me up. They just kept buttoning their jackets like nothing had happened. When I told Dad, he crouched down and said, "They're adjusting Ethan. It's hard losing a parent. Be patient." I wanted to ask, what about me? Didn't I lose one too? But I didn't. I just nodded. Later, at the reception in Tamara's backyard, everyone posed for photos in front of a rented arch covered in silk flowers. The step kids were front and center, arms around each other. I stood at the end, half cut off by the frame. The photographer didn't ask me to move in. That night, while the other kids watched a movie in the living room with popcorn and soda, I was led upstairs to a guest bedroom. The sheets smelled like lavender and starch. A folded towel sat at the end of the bed with a note. "For Ethan, welcome." But it wasn't in my dad's handwriting. I lay there listening to laughter downstairs. Through the vent, I heard Brian shout something about being glad the weird kid wasn't with them. My hands curled into fists under the blanket. The door creaked open gently, and a soft shadow entered. Grandma Margaret. She was wearing her usual wool cardigan, even though the house was warm. She didn't say much. Grandma never used more words than necessary, but she sat beside me, noticed me rubbing my elbow, and without a word, pulled a peppermint from her purse. She placed it on the nightstand, then pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. She patted my leg once and stood up. Then she slipped a folded note into the breast pocket of my pajama shirt. I didn't open it until after she left. It said, "You don't have to prove you belong. I already know." That night, I fell asleep holding that note in one hand, the peppermint in the other. The taste stayed with me long after the sugar melted. A quiet kind of sweetness, one that didn't ask me to be anything other than 5 and hurting. And as strange as it sounds, that was the first time I realized something. Not all smiles mean safety. Not every family is meant for you. But sometimes, the people who stand in the shadows end up loving you loudest. "Only $100? My father barked, voice tight with disbelief. His chair scraped against the wood-paneled floor of the law office. After everything I gave her? Evelyn Shaw didn't flinch. She just folded her hands on the leather folio in front of her and said, with the kind of calm that could slice steel, "That's the minimum required in the state of Oregon to invalidate any claim to the estate. Legally binding. Intentional." Dad's mouth opened again, but no sound came out this time. He blinked, as if trying to process what she'd just said. Tamara leaned forward, arms crossed, face tight. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not," Evelyn replied. "The trust was created 2 years ago. Margaret reviewed and confirmed it a month before her passing. We have the video, witnesses. Everything is in order." I stayed quiet. My hands rested on my knees, fingers curled against the wool of my dark coat. I didn't look at them. I looked at the photo on Evelyn's desk, Grandma and me in front of Willow Hearth, the house she loved more than anything else, the house she'd grown up in, the house she let me come home to when no one else would. I remember what she used to say when people brought up what's fair. "Justice doesn't always look like fairness, sweetheart. Sometimes it looks like a locked door. And sometimes it's the only way to keep the cold out." Dad stood pacing now. She was senile. She wasn't thinking clearly. Ethan must have... Evelyn raised a hand. "Mr. Blake, you're welcome to challenge the trust, but I assure you you'll lose. Your mother was sharp, prepared. She knew what she was doing." Tamara glared at me. "You manipulated her. You knew what you were doing." That's when Evelyn pulled out the sealed folder. She opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside was a copy of the living trust, Margaret's signature bold, dated and witnessed. Tucked into the sleeve was a still frame from the video recording. Grandma sitting upright at the kitchen table, reading glasses on, pen poised. In the background, a Bluebird mug sat steaming beside her, her favorite. "Signed, notarized, recorded," Evelyn said. "I watched it myself. There's no pressure, no coaching. She's clear, composed, and specific." My father sat back down, his face pale. I could see the moment the wind left him. "She left everything?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "Yes. The house, personal assets, her savings, heirlooms, everything to Ethan. The only item you receive is the check for $100, which she wrote by hand, and even that was to ensure legal disqualification. Nothing was left to Tamara or her children. Margaret was very clear on that point." Tamara hissed under her breath. unbelievable. What was truly unbelievable was that I felt nothing. Not triumph, not guilt, just a strange, distant kind of quiet, like watching someone else's life unfold from behind a pane of glass. I signed a few documents. Evelyn walked me through a checklist. She explained that the transfer of the house would be finalized within the week, and the remainder of the estate was being placed in a protected account under my name. Dad didn't look at me. Not once. I stepped out into the brittle January cold and walked to my car. Frost lined the edges of the windshield. As I reached for the door, I noticed something taped beneath the wiper, a folded sheet of lined paper flapping faintly in the breeze. My heart didn't race. I'd learned long ago not to expect warmth from that side of the family. I peeled it off, unfolded it. You stole her from us. You think money makes you her favorite? She pitied you. No name. No signature. Just venom. I folded it again, once, twice, then slipped it into the glove box without a word. Back at Willow Hearth, the house was colder than usual. I didn't turn on the heater. Instead, I walked straight into the living room where her photo still sat on the mantel, Grandma in her garden gloves, standing proudly by her rose bushes. I lit a candle beside it. The flame flickered for a moment, catching its rhythm. As I leaned in to adjust the frame, something slipped from behind the picture, a small handwritten note on thick cream paper. The edges were yellowed. I recognized her script immediately. This house was always yours. 5 words. That's all. But it broke something open in me I didn't know I was holding shut. Not grief exactly, not relief, just understanding. I sat on the old floral couch, hands in my lap, and looked around. The walls were still the soft blue she'd chosen after repainting in 2002. The same afghan she crocheted in '95 lay folded neatly on the armrest. On the coffee table, her favorite envelope knife still sharp, still gleaming silver, all of it was hers. And now, mine. But what she really left me wasn't the house, or the bank account, or even the photo. It was something quieter, harder to describe. It was the right to stay, without apology, without begging. She'd seen me, even when they didn't. And that, I thought, was worth far more than $100 or 17 years of being invisible. I was 11 the day my stepbrother shoved me so hard I hit the coffee table and saw stars. It happened right in the center of Grandma's living room. Her polished floor, her precious lilac-scented candles, her lemon oil shining on every wood surface. For a second, the whole room tilted and the air knocked out of me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just blinked, wide-eyed, and tried to make sense of why no one was moving. My step-siblings didn't flinch. Melissa had her arms crossed and her face turned away like I was an inconvenience. Brian was already muttering about how I was dramatic. Tamara gave her usual airy laugh, light, dismissive. "Boys play rough," she said, as if that made it okay. Dad didn't even get up from the armchair. He didn't see the bruises the way Grandma did. He never did. She came in from the kitchen, still holding the lemon-scented rag she'd been using to polish the piano keys. When she saw me on the floor, hands splayed, glasses crooked, she didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. "Enough," she said. Everyone looked up. "You don't treat blood like a stray dog," she added, voice rising in a way I had never heard. "Not in my house." Brian scoffed. He was trying to squeeze in where there wasn't room. "There was room," I whispered, but no one heard me except her. Richard stood, hands raised like he was calming a fussy crowd. "Margaret, let's not blow this out of proportion. They're kids. It happens." She turned to him, eyes like steel. You lost a son the day you let them treat him like furniture. I won't." Tamara's smile slipped. "I think we should go." "I agree," Grandma said, already walking to the front door. She didn't ask them to leave. She opened the door wide and then, when they hesitated, pointed outside. "I said go." Dad stared at her like she'd spoken another language. "You're serious?" "I am." "You're really going to throw out your own son?" "I'm not throwing you out," she said. "I'm choosing who I let stay." Richard looked at me then, not with regret, just confusion, as if he couldn't understand how I'd ended up on the wrong team. "Come on," he muttered, grabbing my wrist. "You're coming home." But before I could even get to my feet, Grandma stepped between us. She looked up at him. She was smaller, older, but at that moment she felt taller than the house itself. "He is home," she said. Then she reached behind her and shut the door. The sound echoed like thunder, deep and final. The brass lock clicked into place. I stood frozen, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had locked the door for me, not against me. Dad yelled from the porch, banging once, twice. Tamara's voice rang out, sharp, shrill, but the words blurred. Grandma turned, her face calm now. "Come help me boil some water," she said. I followed her into the kitchen, legs shaking. She filled the kettle, turned the knob on the stove, and began unwrapping a tin of rooibos tea. Her hands were steady, not hurried. She even hummed a little, a low tune that might have been from an old jazz record. "Are they going to call the police?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Let them." The kettle whistled minutes later, and she poured the tea into her favorite blue and white china cup, the one with tiny birds perched along the rim. Then she pressed the cup into my hands. Warmth traveled through my fingers, up my arms, and settled somewhere deep inside my chest. "I added honey," she said. "You always flinch at the bitterness." We sat in silence at the kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet tick of the grandfather clock and the distant hum of cicadas outside. I sipped slowly, the tea slightly too hot but grounding, like stepping into sunlight after a long night. Hours passed. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was the faint red and blue glow sweeping across the porch, the creak of the old swing, the low rumble of voices, male, official, careful. I padded to the front door and peeked through the side curtain. 2 officers, one standing tall, arms folded, the other taking notes. Dad and Tamara stood at the edge of the porch, gesturing. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language told enough. Disbelief, frustration, pride bruised. Grandma sat on her rocking chair knitting. She didn't rise, didn't shout, just answered questions with measured patience. At one point, she looked up and met my eyes through the window. She gave a small smile, one that said, "Still with me?" and then turned back to her knitting. I stepped away from the window and curled back onto the couch, teacup now empty beside me. When she came inside later, cheeks pink from the breeze, she didn't speak right away. She just hung her cardigan, washed her hands, and sat beside me. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. "No," she said. "You're finally safe." "She signed everything," Evelyn said, slipping off her leather gloves and setting them carefully beside the kettle, "because she knew who would come knocking." The kettle on the stove hadn't even started to sing yet, but somehow the room already felt heavier. I didn't say anything. I just reached for a second mug and poured 2 cups of rooibos, one for her, one for me. It was the same blend Grandma used to make. Slightly floral, a hint of spice, sweetened with a dab of local honey. It filled the kitchen with memory, not just aroma. Evelyn took a seat at the pinewood table, its surface still bearing the faint scratch from where I'd dropped a fork years ago. She laid out a manila folder and her tablet, then folded her hands, letting her gaze rest on mine. "Richard has filed a formal petition," she said. "He's contesting the trust." I didn't react. I stirred the tea slowly, letting the spoon clink once against the ceramic. "He's citing undue influence, claims Margaret wasn't of sound mind, suggests that you manipulated her." I sipped the tea. "And you?" "I've reviewed the documents, the videos, the timeline. He won't win." She tapped the folder, sliding it toward me. "Here's the footage, dated 13 months before her death, witnesses present, sound, clear judgment." She said, verbatim, "I've made my choice. No one will change it." I opened the folder slowly, almost ceremoniously. The still image on the top page captured Grandma sitting at this very table, posture upright, glasses perched low on her nose, bluebird mug just out of frame. Her eyes were focused, steady. "She didn't hesitate," Evelyn added. "She was deliberate, unapologetic." I nodded, but my fingers gripped the paper tighter than they needed to. Some part of me had hoped Richard wouldn't stoop this far. But I also knew Margaret, and if she'd planned this far ahead, it wasn't out of fear. It was certainty. A soft knock at the door pulled us both from the moment. I opened it to find Mr. Lorne, standing in the cold with a towel-wrapped loaf tucked under one arm. "Thought you could use something warm," he said simply, stepping inside. "Cornbread. Fresh." He looked around the kitchen, taking in the papers, the tea, the tension in the air. Evelyn nodded in greeting. "Good to see you, Amos." He set the cornbread on the counter, then caught sight of the cookie tin by the hearth, its lid closed, polished but clearly worn with age. "You still have that thing," he chuckled. I smiled faintly. "Some things stay." "I remember the night you came here," he said quietly, voice dipping into memory. "It was raining so hard you looked like a soaked newspaper left on the porch. And you were holding that tin like it was a treasure chest." I remember, too. Everything I owned, 3 t-shirts, a folded comic book, and a tin of peppermints, had been in that box. I'd walked half a mile in the rain after Dad told me I'd have to sleep in the garage for acting too soft. "She opened the door," Lorne continued, "looked you up and down and said, 'Well, you're home now. Come inside before the storm does more damage.'" He paused. Later that night, I told her, "That boy doesn't need another scar. He needs a roof that stays." She nodded once and said, "That's exactly what I intend to give him." The room went still. Evelyn leaned forward. "They'll offer a settlement. They always do when they realize the will won't bend. They'll frame it as compromise, as love." "There won't be a settlement," I said. "What she gave me, I'm keeping. All of it." Lorne nodded. "Then you'll need more than cornbread. You'll need backbone." He smiled, but it was tinged with something older, wiser. After they left, I stayed at the table for a long time. The fog outside was lifting, revealing soft blue sky. But the house felt quieter than usual, not empty, just watchful. My phone buzzed on the counter. An email. From Richard. Subject, you. 2 words in the body. You're dead. I stared at it. My tea had gone cold. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the hearth and knelt beside the cookie tin. I lifted the lid, not to add anything, not to remove anything, just to remind myself what stayed. The tin was nearly empty now, just a few yellowing pages of Grandma's notes, and a pressed peppermint still wrapped in crinkled plastic. I reached for my journal, flipped to the back page, and wrote 4 words. "I am not yours." Then I closed the lid, turned off my phone, and lit a candle by her photo. As the wax pooled and the wick glowed steady, I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you for the roof, Grandma." And in that silence, something solid settled in my bones. Not vengeance, just peace. They called me selfish, I wrote in my journal that foggy spring morning, after I stopped apologizing for existing. The words didn't sting as much as they used to. They just sat there, quiet and final. I closed the journal, slid it into the drawer beneath the hearth, right beside the peppermint tin, and walked to the kitchen. Rooibos tea was already steeping, the scent grounding me. The radio hummed gently in the background, some Ella Fitzgerald cover murmuring about lost springtime and longer nights. The fog outside Willow Hearth blurred the line between trees and sky, making everything look like it was still dreaming. March in Oregon had a way of doing that, keeping you suspended in a kind of almost awake. At precisely 10, Sarah knocked. She stepped inside holding a paper bag and a yearbook, both hugged tightly to her chest. "Apple fritters," she announced, removing her boots. "And a trip down memory lane." I raised an eyebrow. "You always bring carbs and existential crises together?" "Only for special people," she said, smiling. It had been years, but she hadn't changed much. Same wild curls, same sardonic glint in her eye. Same Sarah who once traded lunches with me in 8th grade because she didn't want me eating expired pudding cups again. We settled into the sunroom, surrounded by fogged-up windows and the faint creak of the old wooden floor. She opened the yearbook to a bookmarked page. "There," she said, tapping the photo, "your first concert." I peered at the image. There I was, 11 years old, standing too straight, trumpet too big for my body, my mouth in a near smile, like I hadn't decided if I was allowed to be happy that day. "I waited 2 hours for your dad to pick you up afterward," she said. "Remember?" I nodded slowly. "You shared your soda and told me janitors always had extra keys so I wouldn't get locked in. You were so quiet that night, but when your grandma showed up, man, I swear, she looked at you like you'd just returned from war." We laughed softly, but the sound faded into a thoughtful silence. I stood to refill our mugs. "You know," I said, "there was a time I planned to split the inheritance." Sarah looked up surprised. "I wrote out the amounts, 5,000 each. Nothing big, just something to say. Hey, I'm not a monster." She tilted her head. "Why would you need to say that?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a cedar box Grandma had kept locked until her final month. Inside were letters from decades past, receipts, Sunday programs, even a photo of me asleep in her lap during a storm. At the bottom was a single scrap of yellow paper. "You don't owe people who only remember you when it's convenient." Her handwriting, bold, unapologetic. I handed it to Sarah, who read it and smiled. "That sounds like her." Later, after she'd gone, I pulled up my laptop. The email draft was still there, titled, "Something Grandma Would Have Wanted." The words were deliberate, measured, apologetic. I scrolled through it, rereading the part where I explained I wasn't angry, that I only wanted peace. But it wasn't true. I didn't want peace. I wanted to stop performing penance for existing. I wanted space, not approval. I wanted silence. I didn't delete the draft. That would have felt like a rejection. But I didn't send it either. I printed it out, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the peppermint tin, along with a wrapped candy and the photo of me and Grandma from her garden. Then I closed the lid and let it be. That night, I opened social media. I didn't want to, but I needed to know. Melissa had posted a vague quote. We don't grieve money. We grieve betrayal. Brian had tagged himself at some coastal brewery, writing, "Nothing like a drink to remember people who forgot you." Zoe reposted a grainy photo of Grandma's garden, captioned, "Still missing you. Some of us actually loved you." None of them had messaged me. They just performed their grief in public pixels and left silence in my inbox. I shut the laptop. The house felt too quiet, so I walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I noticed the envelope. It was tucked behind a stack of cookbooks, its edges worn, ink bleeding just slightly at the corners. Bold red letters spelled out, "For when they come back." My breath caught. Inside was a photo, me at 7, planting a small sapling in the yard, dirt on my face, my shirt 2 sizes too big. Grandma knelt beside me, laughing. You could tell even from the still frame that it wasn't staged. It was joy. On the back, in her handwriting, "Your roots are here. Not with them." I stood for a while, the envelope in one hand, the peppermint tin in the other. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I felt something settle in me again. Quiet, sure, and unshakable. The kind of peace you don't chase. The kind you choose to keep. I almost packed my bags out of habit until I realized no one was asking me to leave anymore. The instinct had been automatic. Fold the shirts, close the drawer gently, check the lock on the cookie tin, tuck the photo under a sweater just in case. That quiet preparation for flight I'd perfected as a kid. But this time, there was no knock, no suitcase by the door, no voice calling from downstairs to say, "Time to go." Only sun filtering through lace curtains, casting soft gold lines across the wooden floor, and silence, the good kind, the kind that didn't mean absence, the kind that meant peace. I stood barefoot in the living room, the warmth from the sun gently creeping over my toes. The house smelled like toast and brewed rooibos. A small vase of daffodils from the backyard sat on the kitchen table. They were bright, unapologetically yellow. Grandma would have liked that. The phone buzzed on the counter. It was Evelyn. "Just got word," she said, skipping formalities. "He dropped the case. It's officially closed." I exhaled. No hearing. No hearing. No appeals. Just a statement filed saying, "No further interest." "Thank you," I said quietly. "You did the hard part," she replied. "I just walked the paper in." After we hung up, I stared at the screen for a moment longer. The house didn't feel any different. The sun didn't shine brighter. The floor didn't shift under my feet, but something inside me uncurled. Later that afternoon, Mr. Lorne came by. He let himself in through the side gate, a habit he picked up decades ago and never asked permission for. "Looks like this house picked you after all," he said, setting down a small tray with 2 slices of lemon pound cake. "Told Margaret it would." I smiled. "It's a stubborn one." He nodded, then glanced at the peppermint tin on the mantel. "Funny how the things we carry end up staying longer than we do." We sat in silence for a while, eating, sipping tea. The afternoon breeze wandered in through the window, carrying the scent of grass clippings and warm dirt. After he left, I pulled Grandma's favorite chair from its place in the corner and dusted it carefully. I polished the armrests, fluffed the cushion, and laid her folded shawl across the back like she used to. Then I placed the photo of us planting the tree beside the peppermint tin on the side table. No plaque, no display, just a quiet corner where she could still sit with me. I was sweeping the front porch when a small knock came from the gate. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, stood there with a book bag slung over one shoulder and a hopeful look in his eyes. "My mom says you have books," he said. "Can I borrow one?" I blinked. caught off guard by how familiar that voice sounded. Not his pitch, but the way he asked, like he wasn't sure if the world would say yes. I knelt to his level. "Yes," I said, "but you have to return it. That's the only rule." He grinned and ran off before I could ask his name. Inside, I walked to the hall closet where Grandma kept her tools and pulled out the small wooden sign she'd carved but never hung. I dusted it off, then reached for a hammer and a nail. The porch creaked as I stepped back outside. The sun had begun to lower, casting longer shadows across the lilacs in the yard. I held the sign up above the door frame, right where the light would catch it in the mornings. It read, "Willow Hearth, where I stayed." I hammered it into place slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed, not loud, but enough to let the house know something was changing. Inside again, I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and sat in her chair. I flipped on the radio, like she used to every evening, and let it scan through the static until it landed on a familiar tune. Moon River. The version she liked. Gentle piano, slow and steady. I didn't cry. I just listened. She left me a house. But more than that, she left me permission to stay. I didn't need applause or forgiveness to know I'd done the right thing. All it took was a cup of tea, the sun through lace curtains, and the quiet knowledge that no one could take this roof from me again. Sometimes, the deepest kind of healing isn't loud. It's staying when you once would have run. It's planting roots where you were once told you didn't belong, and learning that love, when real, never asks you to shrink to fit in. If this story reminds you of someone you loved quietly, or someone who stood up when others stayed silent, I'd be honored to hear about it. What made your house finally feel like home?